It was a quiet evening in a small village nestled between endless fields and a dense forest. The golden hues of the setting sun had faded, and darkness embraced the land. Inside a modest cottage on the outskirts, 3-year-old Ethan sat on a tattered rug, his tiny hands clutching a worn teddy bear. Born blind, Ethan's world was one of sounds, smells, and textures. His laughter was the music of his parents' hearts. But tonight, the laughter was replaced by silence. Ethan's mother, Clara, hummed softly in the kitchen, preparing his favorite soup, while his father, Mark, fixed a broken chair by the fire. The family was small but tightly knit, their love for one another unshakable. They lived a simple life, but one filled with warmth. Suddenly, an eerie sound pierced the stillness. The howl of a distant animal echoed through the night, making Clara pause. The family dog, Max, barked nervously, his ears perked. Ethan felt the tension. Though he couldn't see, his senses were sharp, and the shift in the room's atmosphere unsettled him. "Mommy, what was that?" Ethan asked, clutching his teddy tighter. "It's just the wind, sweetheart." Clara reassured him, though her voice betrayed a hint of worry. Moments later, a loud bang came from outside. Mark grabbed a lantern and stepped out to investigate. Clara stayed by the door, her heart pounding. Max growled, his body tense as if sensing danger. Mark returned, shaking his head. "I didn't see anything. Maybe it was a branch falling." But Clara couldn't shake the unease. She locked the doors and windows, her instincts warning her of something amiss. As the family settled in for the night, a storm began to brew outside, the wind howling like a wounded animal. It was a quiet evening in a small village nestled between endless fields and a dense forest. The golden hues of the setting sun had faded, and darkness embraced the land. Inside a modest cottage on the outskirts, 3-year-old Ethan sat on a tattered rug, his tiny hands clutching a worn teddy bear. Born blind, Ethan's world was one of sounds, smells, and textures. His laughter was the music of his parents' hearts. But tonight, the laughter was replaced by silence. Ethan's mother, Clara, hummed softly in the kitchen, preparing his favorite soup, while his father, Mark, fixed a broken chair by the fire. The family was small but tightly knit, their love for one another unshakable. They lived a simple life, but one filled with warmth. Suddenly, an eerie sound pierced the stillness. The howl of a distant animal echoed through the night, making Clara pause. The family dog, Max, barked nervously, his ears perked. Ethan felt the tension. Though he couldn't see, his senses were sharp, and the shift in the room's atmosphere unsettled him. "Mommy, what was that?" Ethan asked, clutching his teddy tighter. "It's just the wind, sweetheart." Clara reassured him, though her voice betrayed a hint of worry. Moments later, a loud bang came from outside. Mark grabbed a lantern and stepped out to investigate. Clara stayed by the door, her heart pounding. Max growled, his body tense as if sensing danger. Mark returned, shaking his head. "I didn't see anything. Maybe it was a branch falling." But Clara couldn't shake the unease. She locked the doors and windows, her instincts warning her of something amiss. As the family settled in for the night, a storm began to brew outside, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Hours later, the storm raged on. Thunder boomed, and rain lashed against the windows. Ethan lay in his bed, unable to sleep. His teddy bear felt damp from the sweat of his tiny hands. He tried to calm himself by humming the lullaby his mother often sang, but the storm's fury was unrelenting. Then he heard it, a faint cry, almost human but not quite. It was coming from the direction of the forest. Ethan sat up, his heart racing. He pressed his ear against the wall, trying to make sense of the sound. It wasn't his imagination. Someone, or something, was crying for help. "Mommy, Daddy," Ethan called out, his voice trembling. Clara and Mark rushed to his side. "What's wrong, babies?" Clara asked, smoothing his curly hair. "There's someone outside," "They are crying. I heard them," Ethan said, his voice a mix of fear and urgency. Mark and Clara exchanged uneasy glances. The storm was too violent for anyone to be wandering outside. Still, Ethan's conviction was unsettling. Clara held him close, whispering words of comfort. But deep down, Ethan knew something was wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that whoever, or whatever, was out there needed help. The morning after the storm, the village awoke to chaos. Trees had been uprooted, fences shattered, and roofs damaged. Mark ventured outside to assess the damage to their property. Clara stayed inside with Ethan, who couldn't stop talking about the crying he'd heard. "It sounded like a little boy, Mommy. He was scared, like me," Ethan insisted. Clara tried to distract him with his favorite toys, but her son's words lingered in her mind. That's when a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Carter, their elderly neighbor, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Clara, have you heard? Sarah's boy is missing," Mrs. Carter exclaimed. "Missing? What do you mean?" Clara asked, her heart sinking. "Little Tommy. He wandered out during the storm and hasn't come back. Sarah is beside herself. The villagers are organizing a search party." Ethan, sitting nearby, overheard the conversation. His tiny hands gripped his teddy bear tightly. "Mommy, is it the boy I heard last night?" Clara froze, her stomach twisting into knots. Could Ethan's claim be connected to Tommy's disappearance? It seemed far-fetched, but her son's words weighed heavily on her. By noon, the search party was combing the fields and forest. Clara and Mark joined in, leaving Ethan with Mrs. Carter. The villagers called Tommy's name, their voices echoing through the trees. Hours passed, but there was no sign of the boy. Just as the sun began to set, a chilling discovery was made. A small shoe stuck in the mud near the forest edge. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. It was Tommy's shoe, no doubt about it. But there were no other traces, no footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. It was as if the boy had vanished into thin air. That night, as the village mourned the mysterious disappearance, Ethan sat by the window, his unseeing eyes staring into the darkness. He felt a deep sadness, as though he'd lost a friend he never met. Clara noticed his somber mood and hugged him tightly. "You're safe, my love. Don't worry about Tommy. The grown-ups will find him," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed her own words. As the household settled into an uneasy sleep, Ethan was awakened by a peculiar sound. A soft whine, followed by faint scratching at the door. His heart raced. He slid out of bed and tiptoed to the door, his bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "Who's there?" Ethan whispered, pressing his ear against the door. The whine came again, more insistent this time. Against his better judgment, Ethan unlocked the door and opened it a crack. A rush of cold air hit his face, and then he felt something warm and wet, a tongue licking his hand. "Doggy," Ethan said, confused. A scruffy stray dog stood at the doorstep, its fur matted and muddy from the storm. Its eyes, golden and piercing, seemed to bore into Ethan's soul. The dog whined again, nudging his hand as if urging him to follow. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Clara's voice startled him. She rushed to the door, her face pale with fear. "You can't just open the door like that, sweetheart." "But the doggy is here," Ethan said, pointing. "He wants me to go with him." Clara looked outside but saw nothing. "There's no dog, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan frowned. He could feel the dog, hear its breaths, but why couldn't his mother see it? The next morning, Ethan couldn't stop talking about the dog. His real mommy. His trying to help us find Tommy. Clara dismissed his claims as a child's imagination, but Mark noticed something odd near the doorstep. A trail of paw prints leading toward the forest. They were fresh, despite the ground being dry from the previous day's sun. Mark followed the trail, curiosity driving him. The prints led deep into the forest, to a secluded spot where the trees grew dense and sunlight barely penetrated. There, he found a strange sight, a patch of disturbed earth, as though something had been buried or dug up recently. He marked the spot and returned home, his mind racing with questions. That night, the dog returned. This time, it wasn't alone. It barked softly, its golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. Ethan felt a pull, a strange connection he couldn't explain. "Mommy," his back, Ethan whispered, tugging at Clara's sleeve. Clara hesitated but decided to humor her son. To her shock, when she looked outside, she saw the dog, scruffy and forlorn, just as Ethan described. "I told you he's real," Ethan exclaimed, his face lighting up. The dog barked again, turning to face the forest. It paused, looking back at them as if urging them to follow. Clara's instinct screamed to stay inside, but something about the dog's demeanor was oddly comforting. "Mark, we need to follow it," Clara said, her voice firm. "I think it's trying to tell us something." And so, with lanterns in hand and their hearts pounding, the family ventured into the forest, guided by a stray dog and a blind boy's unwavering belief. What awaited them in the shadows would change their lives forever. The forest seemed alive that night, its trees swaying gently despite the absence of wind. Shadows danced under the moonlight, creating shapes that seemed almost human. The stray dog led the family through the dense woods, its tail wagging with purpose. Ethan clung to Clara's hand, his teddy bear tucked under his arm. "Do you think this is safe?" Mark asked, glancing nervously at Clara. "We can't turn back now," Clara replied, her voice steady but her heart racing. The dog stopped suddenly, sniffing the ground. It barked once, then scratched at a pile of leaves near a cluster of thick trees. Mark knelt and brushed the leaves aside, revealing a small wooden box partially buried in the soil. It was old and worn, its hinges rusted. "What is this doing here?" Mark muttered, prying the box open. Inside, they found a child's drawing, a crude depiction of a boy and a dog standing in front of a house. Ethan's unseeing eyes lit up as he ran his fingers over the paper. "It feels happy," Ethan said softly, a small smile playing on his lips. Clara and Mark exchanged uneasy glances. The drawing seemed harmless, but its presence here, in the middle of the forest, felt eerily out of place. The dog barked again, breaking their thoughts, and began walking further into the woods. As they followed the dog deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air felt cooler, and an eerie silence replaced the usual nighttime sounds. Even the crickets seemed to have gone quiet. Clara tightened her grip on Ethan's hand, her maternal instincts on high alert. "Mommy, I hear whispers," Ethan said suddenly, stopping in his tracks. Clara knelt to his level, her heart skipping a beat. "What kind of whispers, sweetheart?" "They're soft, like someone is calling for me. But it's not scary. It's like they need help," Ethan replied, tilting his head as if listening. Mark shone his lantern around, its beam cutting through the darkness. "I don't hear anything," he said, his voice low. The dog barked, louder this time, its tail wagging with urgency. It led them to a small clearing where the moonlight revealed an old, abandoned well. The stones were moss-covered, and vines snaked up its sides. Ethan let go of Clara's hand and walked toward the well, guided by an invisible force. "Ethan, wait!" Clara called, rushing to grab him. Ethan stopped just short of the well, his tiny hands reaching out to feel its rough surface. "It's here," he whispered. "The boy is here." Mark peered into the well, his stomach twisting. The faint smell of damp earth and decay rose from its depths. "There's nothing down there," he said, though his voice wavered. But Ethan was adamant. "He's here, Daddy. I can feel him." The dog sat by the well, its golden eyes fixed on Ethan. Clara noticed how calm the animal seemed, as if it understood something they didn't. She knelt beside Ethan, brushing his hair back. "Sweetheart, are you sure? How do you know?" Ethan pressed his hands against the well stones, his face serene. "I don't know how, Mommy, but I can feel his sadness. He's scared, but he knows we're here." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What do? We can't just leave. But it's not like we can climb down there." Clara looked at the dog, its presence strangely comforting. "Maybe it brought us here for a reason. Let's stay a little longer." Just then, Ethan's expression changed. He turned toward the dog, his face lighting up. "He says thank you." Clara froze. "Who says thank you?" "The boy." Ethan replied simply. "He says the dog helped him." Mark and Clara exchanged startled glances. Ethan's words were unsettling, but they couldn't deny the strange energy around them. The dog stood and barked again, wagging its tail before heading back into the woods. "Are we supposed to follow it again?" Mark asked, exasperated. "Yes," Ethan said with conviction. "There's more to find." The dog led them along a narrow, overgrown path that twisted deeper into the forest. Clara noticed the ground beneath their feet felt oddly soft, as if it hadn't been walked on in years. Ethan hummed softly to himself, his fingers trailing along the bushes as they walked. "Do you think we'll find him tonight?" Clara asked Mark, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Mark admitted, "but we've come this far. We can't stop now." They emerged into another clearing, this one filled with wildflowers that swayed gently despite the still air. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its massive trunk scarred with carvings. Ethan ran his hands along the tree, his fingers tracing the grooves. "There are pictures here," he said, smiling. Mark held up the lantern, revealing carvings of children and animals, including a dog that looked remarkably like the one leading them. At the base of the tree was a small pile of stones arranged in a circle. The dog sat beside it, its tail wagging softly. "What is this place?" Clara wondered aloud. Ethan knelt beside the stones, his hands hovering over them. "It feels warm," he said. "Like love." Mark crouched beside him, brushing away the dirt. Underneath, they found another drawing, this one older and more faded. It depicted a boy holding hands with a dog, standing beside a well. As Mark examined the drawing, realization struck. "This boy is the one we're looking for, isn't he?" Clara nodded, her throat tight. "But how is that possible? This drawing looks decades old." Ethan tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. "He says he's been waiting for us. He wants us to take him home." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Ethan, what do you mean? How can we take him home?" Ethan smiled softly. "The dog knows. He'll show us." The dog barked and began walking back toward the well. This time, its movements were slower, more deliberate, as if it was guiding them to a final destination. They followed in silence, their hearts heavy with anticipation. When they reached the well, Ethan placed his hands on the stones again. "He's ready," he said simply. Mark hesitated before lowering the lantern into the well. Its light illuminated the damp interior, and there, at the bottom, they saw something glinting, a small locket. "I'll get it," Mark said, his voice resolute. He tied a rope around his waist and carefully climbed down, retrieving the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a boy and a dog, their faces filled with joy. When Mark climbed back up, Ethan took the locket in his hands. "Thank you," he whispered, as if speaking to someone unseen. The dog barked one final time, its golden eyes meeting Ethan's. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the woods. "Wait!" Clara called, but the dog was gone. Ethan smiled, holding the locket close. "He's home now," he said. And in that moment, Clara and Mark felt a strange sense of peace, as if a great weight had been lifted. They didn't understand everything that had happened, but one thing was clear. Ethan had been right all along. The family returned home that night, their hearts heavy with unanswered questions, but also a strange, unexplainable peace. Ethan clutched the locket tightly, as if it held some profound connection to the boy they had never met. Once home, Clara placed the locket on the dining table. Its intricate details glimmered under the warm glow of the kitchen light. "We need to figure out who this boy is," Clara said, her voice filled with determination. Ethan sat at the table, his fingers tracing patterns on the surface. "He says his name is Daniel," Ethan said softly. Clara and Mark froze. The ease with which Ethan delivered this name sent chills down their spines. "Ethan, how do you know that?" Clara asked carefully. "He told me," Ethan replied. "He's happy now, but he wants us to remember him." Mark opened his laptop, determined to dig deeper into the mystery. He searched for missing children in the area, focusing on cases that matched the clues they had uncovered. After hours of searching, Clara pointed at the screen. "That's him," she whispered. The article was from decades ago. A young boy named Daniel had gone missing near the forest, last seen playing with his dog. His family had searched tirelessly, but no trace of him was ever found. The discovery brought an eerie sense of closure. Clara read the article aloud, her voice trembling. Daniel's story was tragic, but it explained so much. The dog that had led them into the woods must have been Daniel's loyal companion, guiding them to uncover the truth. Mark sat in stunned silence. "Do you think he's still out there, in some way?" Ethan answered before Clara could. "He's not scared anymore." The dog made sure of that. The family decided to visit the forest again, this time during the day. They wanted to leave something behind for Daniel, a way to honor his memory. Clara brought flowers, while Mark crafted a small plaque with Daniel's name engraved on it. Ethan held the locket, his small fingers cradling it protectively. "This belongs to him," he said, placing it gently by the well. As they stood there, a soft breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it a sense of calm. Ethan smiled, tilting his head toward the sky. "He says thank you." In the weeks that followed, Ethan's connection to the world seemed to deepen. Despite being blind, he showed an uncanny ability to sense things others couldn't. Clara and Mark noticed how he brought comfort to people, even strangers. One afternoon, while walking in the park, Ethan stopped beside an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench. "Your son says he loves you," Ethan said with a gentle smile. The woman's eyes widened, tears spilling onto her cheeks. How did you know?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged, his expression serene. "I just know." Word of Ethan's gift began to spread, and people started visiting their home, hoping for a chance to experience his unique insight. Clara and Mark were careful to shield Ethan from overwhelming attention, but they couldn't deny the profound impact he was having on others. Ethan's journey had not only changed him but also transformed Clara and Mark. They had always believed in logic and reason, but their experiences with Daniel and the dog had opened their hearts to the unexplainable. Clara started volunteering at a shelter for abandoned animals, inspired by the stray dog that had guided them. Mark, who had always been skeptical of the spiritual, began researching stories of guardian spirits and unexplained phenomena. Their family bond grew stronger, rooted in a newfound appreciation for the unseen connections that bind us all. They learned to trust Ethan's instincts, embracing his unique gift as a blessing rather than a mystery to be solved. On the anniversary of their encounter in the forest, the family returned to the well. They found the locket untouched, glowing softly in the sunlight. Clara placed fresh flowers at the base of the tree, while Mark read aloud a short poem he had written in Daniel's memory. Ethan stood quietly, a peaceful smile on his face. "He's happy now," he said. "He wants us to know he's never far away." As they walked back to their car, Ethan paused and turned toward the forest. "Goodbye, Daniel," he whispered. Back home, the family decided to share their story online. Clara uploaded a video recounting their journey, hoping to inspire others to believe in the unseen and cherish their connections with loved ones, both human and animal. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales. What do you think the stray dog truly was? A guardian angel, a spirit guide, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts. And if you have ever experienced something unexplainable or felt the presence of a loved one who has passed, share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Thank you for watching, and remember to cherish every moment with those you love. Stay tuned for our next story. It might just leave you speechless.